This video is an overview of Lesson 2.4, which is an introduction to scatterplots, correlation, and regression. Just a note about this lesson. At this point in the semester, we can only discuss these ideas qualitatively, and I will provide some rules of thumb for determining whether there's evidence of a correlation between variables. But we can't really discuss these ideas in more depth until we've talked about hypothesis testing in Chapter 9. We're going to discuss correlation, regression, and scatterplots more completely after we've had the discussion of hypothesis testing in Chapter 9 when we get to Chapter 10 at the very end of the course. But since Chapter 2 is all about visualizing data, it would not be a good idea to talk about visualizing data without talking about creating scatterplots for pairs of data, as you'll soon see. And so this is the fourth section or the fourth lesson in Chapter 2, which is all about visualizing data. This is the second chapter in Essentials of Statistics, 6th edition by Mario Triola. These slides are based on slides provided by Pearson and modified by me for our course. Our learning outcomes for 2.4 include the following. After studying this lesson, hopefully you'll know how to construct scatterplots and use scatterplots to infer whether there's a correlation between two variables. I actually don't show you directly how to construct a scatterplot in these videos, but there are videos where I show you how to construct a scatterplot using Excel in the homework help playlist. But we will look at some scatterplots and use those to infer whether there's a correlation between two variables in these videos. Our next learning outcome is to determine whether there's a linear correlation between variables using critical values and the linear correlation coefficient. So we'll talk about what the linear correlation coefficient is, and we'll talk about critical values and how to use critical values to determine whether or not there's a correlation. Then we'll define and interpret what are called p-values and use those to determine whether there is evidence of a linear correlation between variables. And then finally, we're going to summarize all of the important terminology that we studied throughout this lesson, including the terms scatterplot, correlation, linear correlation coefficient, p-value. And then finally, we'll discuss linear regression and what that is. Again, we're talking about all of these ideas in a qualitative way, just so that we have a sense of how we can construct these scatter plots and get some sense of whether or not there's a relationship between two variables. So the key concepts of this lesson are to introduce the analysis of paired sample data, along with scatterplots, correlation, and regression. And then we're going to introduce the ideas of correlation, scatterplots, linear correlation coefficient, p-value, and linear regression. Again, this is just an introduction, and we're going to get into more depth with these ideas in Chapter 10 after we've studied a lot more statistics and we can provide a better background for it. So that's it for our introduction and overview of Lesson 2.4. I will see you in the next video.